Thank you very much, and good afternoon. I am extremely delighted and honored to be with you all this afternoon. And I hope in the time we have together, and indeed throughout the rest of the conference, we can be guided by the four-part road to creativity as described by Bill Moyers, as showing up, really showing up, senses vibrating, listening deeply, speaking the truth, and letting go of predetermined results. Clearly, we gather in unprecedentedly difficult times. In the wake of the financial downturn of 2008, performing arts groups, including but not limited to symphony orchestras, have suffered as acutely as any. Contributed revenues have fallen with significant erosion in individual, government, corporate, and foundation support. Earnings, too, have been affected. Endowment values have plummeted and have yet to recover. Special events, benefits, and galas struggle to meet goals. And deep discounting of tickets, an attempt to keep audiences close in the wake of rising unemployment and consumer anxiety, while on the one hand slowing audience erosion, has nevertheless produced aggregate shortfalls in box office earned income. And we can all probably recite together the litany of responses we've undertaken. Reduced programming, whether number of concerts, scale of the work presented, or length of touring engagements, staff downsizing, furloughs, hiring freezes, reduction or elimination of employee benefits, hikes in ticket prices, and as last resort, emergency fundraising and fire sales. Responses that increasingly feel short-sighted at best and more problematically inadequate. Yet I would contend that the ultimate challenges that we face as artists and organizations is not financial. To explain. In 2006, as the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation entered its 10th year of grant-making, we convened more than 700 artists, managers, technicians, and board members to help us understand the challenges organizations face in the new millennium. Those conversations, 2 years before the financial downturn, revealed a level of stress and uncertainty unlike any I had heard in my more than 30 years in the performing arts. Participants spoke frequently of undercapitalization, yes, and undercompensation, not only of artists, but of managers, technicians, and administrators as well. Many looked ahead to the generational transfer of leadership and wondered where the next great managers and artists would be found. But most dramatically, the conversations returned again and again and again to two key themes: audiences and technology. We heard about dramatic changes in audience composition, demographic changes in age, race, gender, national heritage, language, culture, many cultures for whom the Eurocentric arts are less immediately or apparently valuable, even while we heard of the erosion of audiences in every field, the declining subscription renewals, the difficulty of attracting single-ticket buyers, increased churn, that raising percentage, often 70 or 75% of an audience who will come for one event in a season and not return. We heard of the collapse of the window of social planning, when seemingly overnight, people went from buying tickets not 2 weeks or not 4 weeks in advance, but more typically the day of the show, or if you're lucky, 24 hours or 48 hours in advance. A disorienting shift that continues to plague box offices and marketing departments who on a Tuesday struggle to understand the accurate prospects for a still sparsely sold Saturday concert. After decades of growth, our audiences are shrinking, and our own financial needs, driven in many cases by escalating fixed costs of facilities and insurance, health care, labor, and more, in tandem with negative shifts in funding, mean escalating ticket prices that threaten to place the arts outside of the reach of so many in our communities we wish to reach and serve. And we heard the struggle to understand the impact of technology on the live performing arts. You know, in trying to attract the attention of a single ticket buyer now, you compete with, depending on who you read, between 3,000 and 5,000 different marketing messages a typical American sees every single day. In fact, technology is now our biggest competitor for leisure time. The average American spends 25.7 hours of leisure time watching television or online, the majority online. And we now live in an age where computer games outsell movie and music recordings combined. And perhaps most powerfully, the internet is changing our very assumptions of consumption. Thanks to the internet, we can shop at 3 in the morning or 10 o'clock at night, ordering jeans tailor-made to our own bodies, delivered to our front doors, expectations of personalization, customization, and convenience that the live performing arts, with set venues, set curtain times, attendant inconveniences of travel, parking, and the like, simply cannot match. And what's it going to mean in the future when we ask a young person to pay $100 for a symphony, opera, or ballet ticket, when that consumer is used to downloading culture on demand 24 hours a day for 99 cents a song or for free? These are huge issues. But however particular they feel to us, we're not alone. We are in the midst of a fundamental realignment of culture and communications, a realignment that is decimating the newspaper industry, shaking the book and magazine industry, and in a taste of what may be yet to come, has already left recorded music and distribution, an industry once dominated by the CD and mega chains like Tower Records, in wild disarray. Surely, we resonated through the words of Adrienne Rich when she writes, "We're out in a country that has no language, no laws. Whatever we do is pure invention. The maps they gave us are out of date by years." And aren't you glad you invited me here to brighten your day? Now look, perhaps you don't recognize yourself in these challenges. If you entered the recession on a wave of rising attendance, rising surpluses, increasingly positive capitalization, and rising visibility, your future is probably hunkering down, maintaining direction in hopes of brighter times. But if you recognize the challenges as your own, I urge you to ponder the words of two very different thinkers. Abraham Lincoln, who in his second inaugural address said, "The dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. As our case is new, so must we think anew and act anew." And that other great thinker, Wayne Gretzky, the hockey player, when was the last time you heard them together, who when asked to account for his greatness as a hockey player said, well, quite simply, "I skate to where the puck will be." How is it in the arts that we skate to where the puck will be? You know, I think we have to start by asking, why must we exist today? Because we have a concert hall and a board is no longer good enough. Because we have an endowment and a great staff is no longer good enough. Because we have a scrapbook full of great reviews and critical notices and maybe even Grammy Awards is not enough. What is it in the external world that mandates that our symphonies flourish and thrive today? Every symphony, I would contend, has to ask itself four basic questions in these times. Number one, what is the value of symphonic music, not my orchestra, of symphonic music for my community, whatever you define your community to be? Question number two, what is the value symphonic music alone brings, or symphonic music brings better than anything else? Because especially in this economy, second-rate or duplicative value will not stand for long. Question number three, how would my community be damaged if deprived of symphonic music tomorrow? And question number four, how might my organization be structured, organize, and behave to be my community's optimal conduit to the symphonic repertoire? A question that invites us not to jettison everything we do, but to keep those things that are viable and working, yes, to discard those things that do not or will not work, regardless of how sentimentally attached to them we may have grown, and to expand our vision to embrace possibilities that we may not yet have seen. And those new possibilities are everywhere around us. Wired magazine editor and author of the book The Long Tail, Chris Anderson, sees in the explosion of technology the veritable unleashing of a tsunami of creative energy. Thanks to the invention of cell phones, minicams, computer software, and the like, the means of artistic production have been democratized for the first time in human history. You know, in the 30s, if you wanted to make a movie, you had to work for Warner Brothers or RKO or United Artists, because who could afford movie cameras and editing equipment, sound stages, and more? And now who in this room doesn't know a 14-year-old hard at work on her second, third, or fourth film? Furthermore, the means of artistic distribution have been democratized. Again, Warner Brothers, RKO did that for you. Now go to your computer, go to iTunes, YouTube, upload your film, and you have worldwide distribution without leaving the privacy of your own bedroom. This double impact is occasioning a massive redefinition of the cultural market, a redefinition increasingly less defined by consumption and increasingly more defined by participation. American Idol, Zagat, So You Think You Can Dance, America's Got Talent, even the iPod. The iPod, which alone of all MP3 players did not emphasize downloading, but emphasized personally curated playlists and entering the world of podcasts to share with others, inviting you, a consumer, to be you, the creator, as well. All are predicated on the active involvement of the formerly passive consumer. Every study tells us audiences for traditional venues are dwindling. Audience participation is growing faster than the national population as a whole. And indeed, the most dramatic movement in the last 10 years has been the emergence of what's called the pro-ams, avocational citizens doing work at a professional level. We see their work on YouTube, in dance festivals, on film festivals, and more. These artists, at their best, are expanding our aesthetic vocabulary, even as they assault our traditional notions of cultural authority and undermine the assumed ability of arts institutions to set the cultural agenda. And when we remember that we graduate 120,000 students every year from universities, colleges, and conservatories with arts degrees, the number of arts-savvy yet avocational citizens in this country is destined to increase at an astounding rate. How do we engage them and others, not merely in the consumption, but in the creative process of our work? How do we reorient ourselves to embrace not only classic arts education, but the new arts education, that wealth of arts activities that goes on where virtually every kid is beatboxing and dancing and making films and writing poetry, not because we teach them, but because they teach and mentor one another, all too typically outside of our concert halls, our classrooms, our performing arts centers, and more. How do we expand our vision to say maybe our role is the orchestration of social interaction, in which the concert is a piece, but only a piece of what we're called to do? How do we concern ourselves not with providing products to be consumed, but with creating experiences that will be springboards to our audience's own creativity? Inspired by these kinds of questions, professional artists like Eric Whitaker, whose online choir of 185 voices from 12 countries to perform his composition online, to the thrilling Rusty Musicians program at the Baltimore Symphony, where formerly trained yet no longer professional musicians are allowed to play select concerts beside professional colleagues, these artists are bypassing and neglecting formerly rigid distinctions of professional versus amateur. And in the process, they're generating enormous community allegiance, increasing earned revenues, growing audiences, and converting the very professional musicians, many of whom had resisted the creation of these programs at the outset, only to find the subsequent experience deeply moving and deeply powerful. These are, to be sure, bold steps, but they're just the beginning. Everything now, programming, mission, venue, concert structure, the very business model must be on the table. The National Theatre of Great Britain, in the face of stagnant, aging audiences, radically reduced its ticket prices to the £10 ticket. only to discover overnight the problems of attracting young audiences disappeared, the paid percentage of house skyrocketed, and the audience, for the first time in history, began to reflect the full diversity of the city and country in which it was located. A bold experiment thankfully replicated here in part by the great St. Paul Chamber Orchestra, whose reduction of tickets to $10 and $20 is producing similar dramatic growth of attendance. Furthermore, we may find with time, as many of us suspect, that at these reduced ticket prices, people will come more often, will be more adventurous about the repertoire they sample, less angry when they encounter work they don't like, and will be far more willing to make an individual contribution, recognizing the subsidized ticket essentially as the gift that it is. In a context of conflicting and disparate generational values and expectations, where we must juggle the technological desires for access, transparency, and participation of the young, and the traditional desires of sheer consumption unmediated by technology of the old, especially in this financial climate, how do we work to achieve simultaneously short-term survival and make steps toward long-term transformation? Transformation not in which the new will obliterate the old, but in which the two will converge in ways we are only beginning to imagine. I suggest a threefold approach. Essentialize. Knowing what's at the core that you have to protect and fight for every time. Sacrifice. Giving up the things that fall outside of that core to free up necessary time and resources. And innovate. Sometimes incrementally, sometimes boldly, sometimes carefully, but innovate for the long term. If we can do this, essentialize, sacrifice, and innovate, we'll remember this time not as an ordeal for survival, but as a renaissance. A renaissance in which we renegotiated old practices to reach a thrilling new reality. You know, even while I'm deeply concerned about the viability of many arts organizations I know, I am deeply optimistic about the future for the arts, even though I may not have sounded so until now. You know, as someone who still thinks of his computer as a typewriter with a screen, I decided, some of us do, I decided 2 years ago to go to PopTech, a high-tech conference in Camden, Maine. Contrary to my expectations, this was not a conference about startups or financing. This is a conference where tech leaders come together to talk about the human brain, global warming, AIDS, irrigation, international warfare, and the arts. The arts, with artists being on many panels, and every session followed by the performance of a live performing artist. While arts conferences are frequently dominated by concerns of how will we survive, how will we get endowments, how do we stay on the funding agenda, the very issue of survivability never was raised at PopTech. Indeed, the assumption is many will not and should not survive. Instead, the conversation was centered solely in one question: how will we change the world? How will we conquer AIDS? How will we solve global warming? How will we leave the world a more ecologically balanced, less poverty-ridden place? Indeed, the unspoken assumption is, in a world of high tech, there is nothing we cannot do, and truly anything is possible. Now, you might call it the folly of youth, and they are very young. You might call it hubris. But what was clear to me is that within this context of infinite possibility, there is infinitely new possibility for us. You know, on the one hand, I was cheered this group fought to get there. Camden, Maine is not an easy place to get to if any of you have been there. And God knows if any community can convene virtually, that's the one. And yet people fought to get there because they know firsthand the value of live, face-to-face human interaction, of conspiracy in its Latin sense, to breathe together. And throughout PopTech, a hunger throbbed in the background. This group is desperate to slow down, to lead less frenetic lives, to connect lives to passion. More and more they placed a premium on contemplation, captivation, on single experiences that would resonate, captivate intellectually, resonate spiritually, the very things in the arts we are called to do. especially now in an age of demonization and fear of difference, of intolerant social policies and unending announcements to report suspicious individuals and behavior to authorities near us, subtle reminders that ask us to look at one another with hostility and fear and suspicion. The arts call us together time after time after time to view our fellow human being with generosity and curiosity. God knows if we have ever needed that capacity in human history, we need it now. And so let me urge you to begin to work together these next few days as a conspiracy of breathing together, a conspiracy marked by that same generosity and curiosity in which you celebrate and applaud colleagues not here or whose work by virtue of discipline or size or budget leads them to answers very different than your own. You and we all know that when we've given ourselves to the arts, we honor the past, we commemorate the present, we shape and we change the future in a way that does honor to all and violence to none. For those of us spiritually inclined, it's God's work we do. I would like to salute each and every one of you for your part in doing God's work through the fantastic, extraordinary, difficult work you do in communities all across this country. I would like to assure you the hand of the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation is extended to you in friendship, both now and for years to come. And I would like to thank you for your kindness and your patience in listening to me this afternoon. Thank you and Godspeed.